my pleasure to welcome you to this very special presentation, prepared in partnership with This Story Australia to preserve and share the story of a proud Paduan College old boy and Vietnam veteran, Mr. Sam Sammartino. The good man of Padua's story is underpinned by our college mission to educate young men of wisdom, young men of service, and young men with acquired strength. There's no greater example of this than the stories of the men and women who have served our nation. And Sam's example is a reminder to all of us of the importance of honouring and remembering those stories. Sam has had a profound impact on this community, establishing a connected and engaged veterans group which continues to enhance our experience of reflection and remembrance. Sam's story is part of our story and we're proud to share it with you.
Look, my name is Sam Sammartino. I'm a Padua old boy from 1964, and I'll go into a little bit of depth of where I was born. I was actually born in North Queensland, a place called Ingham, which is just north of Townsville, and I was born on the 15th of April 1947, which is actually going to be a very significant birth date, which I'll explain to you later on in the interview. Well, I was in the Army and I served for 2 years, which doesn't sound a long time, but I was a national serviceman, which I will go on to explain a little bit further how that worked. And I served in Vietnam for almost a year. And basically, as a national serviceman, you went in the Army, they trained you solidly, you went to Vietnam. If you survived Vietnam, you come home and you got out and you said, "Thank you very much, sir." Well, I'll start off where go back to where I was born, because it's a very good story, this one. I come from Italian background. My mother was actually born in Sicily, you too. And my father was actually born in Italy, but my mother came out here when she was very young and my father came out as a teenager. And they got together when my father was working cutting cane up north, very hard work. And I'm the youngest of 3 children. I've got an older brother and an older sister and myself. And unfortunately my father died at a very young age for him, and I was only 5. But where we lived up north, it was just outside of Ingham and it was just a sugarcane area. And my mother and her 4 sisters all lived on this one dirt track, you could say, in amongst all the cane paddocks. Anyway, so out of that we had 15 first cousins. And we all went to the local state school, and the headmaster there just could not get over it, that at his school he only had about 25 students and most of them were first cousins. So that sort of, I think he appreciated that. But then what happened after that, when I got to about 10, my older brother, who's much older than me, decided that it'd be better if we moved down to Brisbane to try and, for better prospects. But my connection to the Franciscan Paduan thing started then, and I didn't know it, because our local church was called St. Anthony's. And although I went to a state school, we had religious instruction, we did our communion and all that through there. And then moved to Brisbane when I was 10. Well, it was pretty well a nice place to grow up in Brisbane in the 50s and the 60s. Like you had plenty of children around the place because it was after the Second World War, so there was a lot of children my age. So just from a personal point of view, I made a lot of friends, but I didn't go to Padua straight away because I just went to the local convent, Catholic primary convent, and at those times, because there were so many boys around the place, you couldn't get into any of these schools. Couldn't get into Gregory Terrace or Marsh Brothers Ashgrove and all those schools that you know of now. So what happened was one day I was just at home and I went to church, that's right, and there was this young kid at church and he was wearing the brown and gold, without the tie that is like that. And I said, what school's that? And he said, "Oh, it's a Padua College, it's only a new school, only just opened." So would you believe that my mother rang Father Alban, who was the principal of the school then, and we actually came to that door there and sat on those steps there, and he interviewed us to go to Padua. So he said, "Yes, we've got room, come." So off we went, and that's my association with Padua, yeah. Well, I think towards the end, being in football this is, but the rugby league, we were premiers that year. That was sort of significant for us because, and that was the year that we, for the first time, the very first 13 wore the 2-stripe jersey, which they sort of, don't they have a back to Banyo Day and they call it the 2Vs or something. Yeah, so we were lucky to, and we were actually presented with the jerseys here at a school fete. So Now, there was quite a few other significant things at Padua. There were nothing sort of drastic as there is today, because it was only such a small school when we sort of got here. But it was a sort of school that, because it was so small, you just basically did everything and you knew everybody. So like you as a Paduan in grade 11, do you know any of the grade 7s and 6s? And you might know the odd one or two. You probably got a brother there. But no. But in our day, you just knew everybody because it was such a small school, and that's what it relied on, you know. So that's what I liked about the school, because it was so new and the kids were just coming through. And what happened was, I think I might have explained to you earlier, is that Padua was very lucky to continue, because the priests who had it went to see the Archbishop to say, look, we can't carry on with this as a school, we want to get out of it. But he conned them up and he bought this high tea for them and everything, and they sort of agreed to carry on. So there were kids who actually came to Padua in the early days, left, and then came back again for grade 11 and 12. So it had that little bit of a connotation to it. See, if you look at those photographs, the top left-hand guy, that's Father Alban. He's the guy that became he was the second principal, but he's the one that really got it going. And he was the one that told me a story about the Archbishop, because about 4 years before he died, he came out to my place at Sanford, and we had a great night, and he was telling me all these things, you know, that a lot of people wouldn't have known that Padua nearly didn't continue.
What did a day in the life of Padua look like for you?
Well, it was getting up reasonably early, having your breakfast and getting yourself going, because I had to walk maybe a good kilometre to get the tram. Then we got the tram out to here, then you had to walk up here, then you had to make sure you played all your games before you before you settled into class. So in the earlier days, we all played marbles, and I actually was quite a good marble player. So we used to have to sit there and play all these marbles and play Ring-a-Ring-a-Rosie or something. And then it was sort of, and of course the education of those days is a little bit different how what you guys are going through. In those days it was more like you just sat in class. They didn't really encourage you to talk too much. You just absorbed everything in, and then you sat for an exam after whenever, and if you put everything down and you got 50%, you passed. But that's basically it, and it was the same as when I used to have to go home. I had to walk down there, get the tram, walk back, get the tram. And if we did football training, we used to do it at Gibson Park. So you'd be walking home at night with your football boots as a thing in case I had to go at you. But they were good times, they were good, yeah. Well, just before I mention my birth date, which was the 15th of April 1947, and the government, after they decided they'd help America with the Vietnam War, they decided for us to help out, we're going to have to bring in some sort of national service to get the numbers up. So they introduced national service, and it was based on your birth date. So what happened was when you turned 20, the first half or the second half of that year is where you're registered. Then they used to have a ballot, and the guy would put it in and he'd pull out a marble, and it said 15th of April 1947. I said, hey, that's me. I wasn't that excited about it. But that's how I got into the army. And then you went through your, the process of medicals and everything, and went in from there. Did you want me just to tell you a little bit about the dynamics of national service? Because that's actually quite important, because you guys wouldn't know any of that. This is probably going to take a couple of minutes. Now, what it is that, as I said before, when you were turned 20 on that particular year, so my year was 1967, right, because that was when I was turning 20, and I was in the first half. So by February or March, you had to go to the post office and you filled out this form and you put it in. Now, there were huge penalties for people who didn't fill this out. And of course, with the Vietnam thing not being that popular, there are a lot of high-flying television actors who decided they weren't going to put their thing in, and they ended up in jail and all sorts of things. But anyway, that's what happened. And out of what happened is that there were 800,000 to the nearest 100,000 people had to register for national service in this period of time, which went from 65 to about 1972. And out of that, there was 130,000 that were actually called up, but then out of that, there were 60,000 that actually went in after they did medicals and everything, okay? So that then gave the army, the government, the numbers they needed, to send people to Vietnam because they went from 1 battalion to 9 battalions ended up going to Vietnam. So without national service, they honestly wouldn't have coped. Well, when a few years back, 9 years ago now, the college decided to acknowledge the Vietnam veteran old boy thing by having this plaque, which you saw there today, done. So I was heavily involved in that from the old boys' perspective and trying to locate the numbers. Anyway, we came up with the fact that there were 44 Padua old boys who actually served in Vietnam, which was actually quite a lot because when we first started the project, we thought we'd get to 25 and that was it, but there was 44. So how the national service fitted in was that there were six Navy and I think 8 Air Force, but Vietnam was more Army. There was something like 30, that's right, 30 Army personnel, and out of that, 21 were national servicemen and 9 were regs. So if the government didn't introduce that little example of Padua, if they didn't actually bring in national service, they wouldn't have had the numbers to send over there. But out of that, what happened is that person, a young fella by the name of Dennis James McCormack, who you heard his name read, we used to call him Skinny, he had to register for the very first lot of national service and he was called up. And he went away, and went with 6th Battalion, the 11th Platoon, which was really heavily involved in it at Long Tan, and unfortunately he was killed almost straight away and the battle started. I know all this because I was talking to some other people who were sort of there. And the story goes that there was another guy called Alfred McCormack, no relative, but one number apart, and he came from Tasmania, but he came up here to work, so he became a Queensland National Serviceman. When the battle started, there were these Viet Cong were in the trees and they hit, Dennis was killed. This guy went over there to help Dennis and he got shot and fell on top of him, and they found the two of them together, when it was all over. So that's, But then there was a guy called Peter Kowalski who some years later had deferred national service but unfortunately had to go in, and he was killed by a mine. So there's a little bit of Padua connection coming through there, that in the Battle of Long Tan, not only did we have Dennis in it who was killed, but we had another bloke called Kevin Branch who survived it, but he died later. So in Long Tan itself, we've got a connection there. So Padua actually contributed strongly to the Vietnam War, really, in a lot of ways. And not only that, could you imagine when it all started in 65, Padua was only a very small school. There would only be, I don't know how many hundreds, but not a real lot. So it was only very tiny to have that number of people get called up. Yes, so that's the connection there with Padua. Personally, I was a sort of a gung-ho, sort of couldn't care less sort of bloke. And I was playing football, I was in a surf club, had plenty of mates around, used to do a little bit of drinking in those days. So I was pretty carefree. And the funny thing about it, my group of mates, none of them got called up. I was the only one. And I'm going, this is a bit unfair. But the thing is, when I did go in the army, I met about another half a dozen blokes that I had known from other football clubs and whatever. But I was very apprehensive. I'll go into a little bit of detail about how it does strike you. When you're a national serviceman, you didn't volunteer for the army. But I actually did volunteer to go to Vietnam, but you didn't volunteer for the army part. So it wasn't as though, oh God, I can't wait to go in the army. Like you're going in the police force or whatever you're going to do, you'll say, oh, I can't wait to do that. You knew you had to do that. But with us, I had no idea I was going in the army until my birth date came out. So what happened was I was getting a bit, so they said, okay, you've got to have a medical first. So I passed the medical, of course, because you're real fit. And then you go in the army, and basically the 2 years, we're only in for 2 years. It's a very full bore 2 years, full on. Like it's recruit training, 10 weeks, go to your corps training, come back to your regiment, Vietnam, come out and get discharged. But I have to admit, the training in the army was just excellent. They just trained you till they trained you. But when you went in the army, you had to get used to all these new mannerisms that they had. Like they never asked you to do things. They shouted at you. And they couldn't count, because when you do your drills, and I don't know if you've done any reserve training, I think you do your drills and you're standing to attention and you say stand at, stand to attention, stand at ease, bang. And they use this 1-2 all the time. Like particularly where there's quite a few segments and it's 1-2, that 1-2, this 1-2. That's how everyone's in the right sequence, you see. So we used to joke with them, say, can't you count above 3? So they say 1, 2, 3, 1. And as I say, in the first couple of weeks in the army, we'd be looking at each other saying, my God, what have we got into here? They just scream at you all the time. But they were doing it for a reason, you know. And it was a full bore, as I say, full bore 10 weeks, and then you get into your core training. And I got what I wanted. I wanted artillery because I liked maths and geometry and all that, and that's what I got. And so I went to do that training at the School of Artillery. That was for about a good 4 months. And then I came here at Enoggera to the regiment or the battery, and then went to Vietnam and then came home from there. So the 2 years was just so full bore. But then going to Vietnam, it wouldn't matter how much training you did, you're never quite ready for what you're going to get over there. Because when you get there, even just landing in this airport called Ton Son Nhuat Airport, at that stage, it was the most busiest airport in the world, but it was all full of gunships and rockets and it just, so you didn't really get used to all that. Is that when I got there, the 4th Battalion and the 6th Battalion, they were what they call Anzac battalions at one stage because they had attached to them these New Zealand rifle companies. So, you know, you have a battalion, then you have 3 Australian infantry companies, then you have 2 New Zealanders, and that became the Anzac thing. Anyway, the role I did with the artillery, I like to say that I was a forward scout for artillery. I was a FO, I directed the artillery in, so I was out with the infantry all the time. And because it was an Anzac battalion, and I'm in the Australian Army and the artillery was Australian, 5 of us went to the New Zealand company. So I would not like to hear a bad word said about New Zealanders because they were just sort of great, you know. So we did that. So in doing that, I started to catch up. See, I didn't go to Vietnam with the guys that I actually served with because I went over at a different time. So I had to get to Vietnam and then meet the blokes that I was going to be with for nearly a year. And you have a lot of mateships go on there, you know, and you have to rely on each other because this isn't a war zone, you know. I mean, it's not just playing rugby on the footy field where you win or lose and off you go. This is, you know, pretty fair dinkum stuff. So I sort of made a hell of a lot of mates there, but I've got to tell you about this snake story. One of the guys with us, old Jono, he won't mind me talking about this. He was, if anything was going to happen, it's going to happen to him. So we were out there patrolling one afternoon with the New Zealanders, and you know New Zealanders don't like snakes or spiders, you know that, don't you? There's none in New Zealand and they hate them because over Vietnam it's very tropical and there's snakes everywhere. So we're doing patrolling our stuff and we came up and hooked up for the night. Anyway, we all do our little picket duty on the edges of the harbour. Anyway, I did mine and then I woke Jono up and he crawls out to do his. So I'm back in the little thing trying to sleep and I hear this very strained voice say, Sam, get out of here. Oh, shit, what's going on? So I crawl out there. What's the matter? Look at my leg. There's a snake. The snake actually went up his leg. It can only happen to him, I tell you. Anyway, I eventually got the thing out. Anyway, it was 32 years later that I actually caught up with him. So he told me, what did you do to get that snake out? But I actually lit the lighter. The snake was right up his leg and he was a bit worried about, you know, being so far up. So I hit the snake and I whizzed it out. But that's not the end of the story. About 2 weeks later after this, the operation had finished and we went back to our place at Nui Dat, which was like a big task force area. So he goes to sleep one night and in the middle of the night he has this nightmare. And you imagine, we're in the middle of a rubber plantation, relatively safe. He starts yelling out, snake, snake. Anyway, everyone's jumping out of tents, rifles are being cocked. Well, what happened was his arm went to sleep, and it went like this and hit him, and he's gone, snake, snake. I hope he doesn't see this interview. But anyway, that was actually one of the funniest things that ever happened over there was that. And of course, the New Zealanders didn't want to know anything about this because they didn't like snakes. But see, we're mates now. It took 32 years for us to get back together again. And the wife of Jono said to me, oh, God, Sam, tell me the story about the snake. So that became a real famous story. Yeah, no, coming home was great. We all wanted to come home, of course. But however, when we did get home, we had there were problems with being accepted, and I don't know why they take it out on the soldiers. But they could tell if you went somewhere, say you went to a party in my day there, everyone just went to parties, to people's houses, and they'd know that you had been to Vietnam because you had really short hair, you were tanned, and you were real fit. And then you just sort of start to get into a little bit of trouble. Blokes wanted to take it out on you because you went to Vietnam. So, we're trying to get across to them. We were just following the government of the day who wanted to send troops there, and our numbers got called up fair and square, and off we went, just because they didn't want to go. But that was actually a pretty terrible sort of experience too, knowing that, even when we were getting discharged, they were saying, don't get in your uniform and go anywhere, just get out of your uniform. So they weren't even going to stick up for us either. So the poor old Vietnam veteran did get a little bit of a hard time of it when they got back. And the RSL were saying, it wasn't a real war and all this sort of stuff. So, but I know that, I am a member of an RSL club now, yes. I wasn't anywhere near it at first. I did nothing. Quite a few of us who, when we got back from Vietnam, we just sort of threw our uniforms away and just went on with life and didn't catch up with them. It took me 32 years for me to catch up with that bloke with the snake in his leg, old Jono, 32 years after Vietnam. So it was sort of inbred in us just to forget about what happened and get on with it. And that should never be the case. The government's going to send you away somewhere, they should be doing something about it. And I know politics come into it, and that's the unfortunate thing. But as they say, it's the politicians that start the war, but the soldier finishes it. Well, before I went there, I was with you've probably eat a few of these products called the Smith Snack Feed Company, which is, Smith's potato crisps and Twisties and Dobby's nuts. Well, I did quite a lot lengthy. I was there before, as I got called up. And the idea of the National Service was that if you were in full-time employment, the employer had to leave your job open for you when you came home. But anyway, I did that and went back to the Smith Snack Feed Company and stayed with them for quite some time, in the 30 odd years it was. Because they were a growing company, you did so many roles, which sort of made it, quite good. But just before that, when I got out of the army, I decided that this is when my birthplace came back in again. I decided to go up to Ingham, where all my relatives were, and I spent a couple of months up there because being in the army and in Vietnam, I had accrued so much not annually, but leave. Because every time we're in Vietnam, every time we went out for an operation, we'd go out for 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. So you're on call 24 hours, 7 days a week. So I'd accrued some leave. So they paid us out. So I had all this money. So I went up north and spent a couple of months up there, which helped me sort of diffuse the Vietnam situation, which was really good. And then I went sort of back to work into the old snack feed company.
Sam, where did you meet your wife?
Yes, okay, that's good. Yeah, no, really good. Yeah, I actually met her on a Christmas day of 1969. And I forget how that happened. Yeah, that's right. My brother had these set of flats, and my wife's sister was living there. And on Christmas morning, I don't know why I ended up going there, but I met her there. And we eventually got married in this church here. And we've been married for 55 years next year. And we just stayed in Brisbane. We didn't really move around too much. Lived at Ferny Hills for a while, then moved out to Sanford, but stayed with that same company for a long time. But because it was developing, it was sort of, there was a lot going on. Well, to be remembered, I would like to be remembered as my mother used to always say to me, Sam, you've got to roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty. In other words, she was saying that if there's a problem there, you've got to go get it. Well, I'd like to be remembered as part from the National Service thing was that, I got called up, what I thought was fair and square. I went into a war zone. So I want to be remembered by someone who was caring and, and sort of going out of her road, not just to be nice, but to sort of help people. I think that's where I come from, and that sort of was the values that I was getting from my mother. I've got 2 children, a daughter and a son who went to Padua. And I have 2 grandchildren. And would you believe, most of my children are all in education. My daughter-in-law and my son are both school teachers, and then my daughter's a school teacher, but my son-in-law is not. So there's a lot of education stuff goes on there. The most important elements of life, I go back to the St. Francis of Assisi stuff when he talks about the right faith, hope and charity, whatever he says. I can't remember his peace song, where he says, where there is hatred, let there bring love. I talk about him, I think about him a lot, St. Francis of Assisi, because I remember when I was at school, I wrote an essay about St. Francis of Assisi, and I called it the most Christ-like man alive. The friars thought it was great. I could have used it as to getting more friars into their group. But no, I have a lot of time for Francis of Assisi, looking at his ethos, and how we spoke about the earth and about the animals and about being caring and kind and about being compassionate. So they're the elements I like to think about, because if everybody loved each other, there shouldn't be any wars. I was affected by Vietnam as well, from a post-traumatic stress disorder thing. And sometimes I used to sort of make life a little bit uncomfortable. But just from a personal point of view, I sort of realised quite early that the problem you have is if you've got PTSD, you're going to go on to these pretty harsh medicines. And if you're going to drink, and I saw so many Vietnam veterans who wouldn't know what day it was, some of them they were dribbling, and it's because they go into these, they didn't have a good support system at home. They'd go to hospital and the doctor would just give them all these medications and just send them home. And they didn't know what to do with these medications. They'd be drinking alcohol with it and doing this. So I actually, from a personal point of view, actually gave up drinking about 25 years ago, which is probably one of the best things that sort of happened. And I say this because when I was involved in the Vietnam Veteran Association, we were called away one night to a caravan park to just say the case I was just talking about, where this guy was in hospital, he gets a discharge, they give him a bag full of medicine, and he went home and he was off his tree in this caravan park. So I had police and trying to sort of calm him down, and anyway, we eventually did succeed in that sort of situation. But there is always support things there, but unfortunately you have to do it yourself. Like the Vietnam veterans did it themselves. And the government came up against a very strong force when they took on the Vietnam Veterans Associations, because those Vietnam veterans, most of them were national servicemen who were highly educated, and they knew the system. And then the government started to change. But this is the trouble with governments. They perceive to change things, but they don't really change anything for the better. So unfortunately, with Vietnam veterans, they went through a hell of a lot of, problems, really. I mean, PTSD was unheard of. In the Second World War, they call it shell shock, and First World War, they call it whatever. But it's a real thing that just affects your lives, and it's not a very nice thing to have to go through, but it just does happen. And anyone who's in a war zone like that would have to be affected somehow. And same as police and all that sort of thing, yeah. Well, the connection to Padua and Francis of Assisi is sort of pretty strong with me, looking at his beliefs and whatever. And as you do say, from Padua, I've got those inbred in me. Yeah, and I think I'm very fortunate to have this connection with Padua. And then when they decided they were doing this plaque, well, that really threw us Vietnam veterans up, because there's not too many other schools that have done this. And when they did it in such a tremendous way that it became unbelievable. Like I was sort of, talking on behalf of the veterans, and I was liaising with Bob Out and Michael O'Brien, etc. And they were telling me this and that. And I said to some of the other veterans, yeah, they won't do that, you'll see. Anyway, the day came that they did it, and it was just so beautifully done. We had the relatives of Dennis McCormack there. He had the relatives of Peter Kowalski there. His mother came, and we were in this room, and she could see that she was so well taken aback by just what Padua did. It just magnificent. So I'm sort of lucky in a way, personally, to have been involved in Padua to that degree. And it steadfastly holds me into, hopefully for the future to do. And I have a son who actually went here and has actually taught here. And all he wants to do is come back to Padua, So Padua's got that hold on people.